We're talking today with Ken Block of Spring Lake, Michigan, and the interviewer is James Smither of the Grand Valley State University Veterans History Project. Okay, start us off with some background on yourself, and to begin with, where and when were you born?
I'm born in Detroit, Michigan, right in the middle of the Depression, 1932. I had one older brother at that time.
Okay, now did you grow up in Detroit, or?
Spent my whole life in Detroit up till the time I left with the uncle's name, tourist view.
Okay, all right. And what did your family do for a living when you were growing up?
My dad and mother both had come from Minnesota. We had no relatives, no friends, anything here. My dad, he was born on a farm.
Mm-hmm.
So with my mother, they had both been here since in Minnesota. Their families, it's rather unusual, I guess. My grandfather was born in the Kingdom of Hanover. There was no German country as such.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And my great-grandfather then was born in 1828. And then the other one goes way back. And then fortunately all these records were available there yet in Germany. And the one in Switzerland, same thing. They came from Switzerland about the same time, the middle 1850s.
Mm-hmm.
Minnesota wasn't a state yet.
Not yet.
State.
Yeah, in the 60s, yeah.
And my mother's parents came from Munich, Germany. So, and the other, my mother's father's family came from Luxembourg, which wasn't a country then. It was a principality, a Germanic principality.
Right. Okay. Now, let's see, I think you said, did one of your grandfathers serve in the Civil War? Was that right?
My grandfather's brother
Okay.
was in Minnesota, but they never got out of Minnesota because the Indian Wars were taking place there, and they needed and he was only 15, but he got a pension from serving.
Okay.
So they took him pretty young at the time, I guess.
All right. So, why did your parents come to Michigan?
Well, there was no available farmland.
Mm-hmm.
My dad was the youngest, and my mother was the youngest in big families. And my dad came and originally got a job in Flint, Michigan, at the General Motors Chevy plant there.
Mm-hmm.
But he realized maybe that wasn't really what he wanted as a career. He was maybe 24, 25.
Mm-hmm.
My mother, he wasn't married yet.
Okay.
But he knew my mother from back in Minnesota. She was a one-room school teacher in Minnesota.
Mm-hmm.
And he heard about an apprenticeship program at Ford Motor.
Mm-hmm.
So he applied for it and he got accepted for a tool and die maker. And it ended up, I think, half the tool and die shop in Detroit.
Mm-hmm.
They were started by former apprentices on that program at Ford Motor Company, which might be why Ford finally cut out the apprentice program where they're training all these people, and then they took off and finally left. Or they trained them, and in 1932 and 1931 came along. I guess it was about 32, 33. And there were a lot of layoffs in the factories. The real depths of the depression happened then, not back in 1929.
Right.
And we did go back to Minnesota for a short period of time. But when he came back, he got a job at Brady, Briggs Manufacturing as a tool and die maker in a tool and die shop. Worked there for a while, and then the war started. And he got a job training people on certain machines. This would have been in 1940, 1941.
Right.
So he was now in a kind of a classroom situation with machines and so on, showing these people how to do these various operations. He did that, and then he worked evenings, some evenings.
Okay. So by then, there's plenty of work now because we're making a lot of things.
Then he and two other guys he'd met opened a tool and die shop. When it was pretty iffy up in the late 1940s, and there was kind of another semi-depression in 1949. And but they each took turns. They had a corporation. Each took turns going on unemployment.
Okay.
But anyway, they turned out they had the only set of forging dies for Sherman tank.
Mm-hmm.
They had bought them in the scrap sale. Well, they were into doing whatever they could to make a buck. They'd buy surplus machines. They bought a box. You sit down a box, mix machine parts, You just had to bid on a big potluck. Turned out it was a brand new Allison aircraft engine and it had never been touched. So they made a few bucks, but with those forging dies, they were able to get into the tank arm business, and they were very successful.
Right.
Made quite a bit of money.
Because we were using a lot of Sherman tanks in Korea at that point, so.
Yeah, tanks breaking down, etc. And they needed these parts. My mother would, during the tougher years, she had jobs working at Sears in the department. When the war started, she was an excellent seamstress. She got a job at automotive fibers and a parachute sewing business, and then she was so good at it, she became an inspector, but she only did it because she had 3 kids at home and my youngest brother, and it was this. Things weren't working out.
Because there weren't regular daycare facilities or things like that in those days.
So anyway, then my dad died in prostate cancer in 1970.
Okay. Well, let's back up here now to your story. So you're too young for World War II yourself. You're still a kid at school.
I was 13 when the war ended.
All right. And then when did you finish high school?
Actually, they were so hard up for high schools. They had all this imploding of people from all over the country to work here.
Right.
That high school consisted of going half a day.
Okay.
If you were a freshman or a sophomore, you went from from the 11th, from noon till about 4 o'clock. And if you were a junior or senior, you went from 8 until 12 o'clock. So the classroom was devoid of pretty much any good training. With my brother and I had such a bad high school. It was Demi High School. We had such a bad situation at that time in terms of working as a pinboy in a bowling alley, and it can't be much worse than being scrapped with the jailer, because situation part of the time there was not that particularly good in the 40s. And
but you wound
I
up.
went to Wayne. I didn't take, wasn't on the college prep program, and I was surprised because my mother had been a teacher, but none of them were too involved in looking at what we were doing in high school.
Okay.
So I got out of high school, and I had to take a test to get into Wayne.
Okay.
And so I did pass it and got into Wayne. My brother, which we'll talk about too, went to a place. He was very interested in television and got a job with Madman Monks, I think it was called, in Detroit, who sold television sets. Many times he'd sell one, and the people would make on a part, so much a month payment or week payment, and then fell behind, and we'd go in and confiscate the television back, and they'd have to maybe do some repairs. So he was into that, and it really helped him out because he went to Electronics Institute. He was so interested in the electronics, and he was just ready when the war comes along where they gave him a deferment for a year to let him finish his program there.
Okay. And now you're talking about the Korean War.
Yeah.
Okay. But you started Wayne State, and what were you studying there?
Up until the time I got shipped to Texas, I was on the geology program, but that's one of the reasons I accepted the idea of going into the Air Force full time. I was a geology major, and a girl I was going with, her cousin, and I came to pretty good. He was a geology major, graduated. I said, damn, geology degree from Wayne isn't going to get you nothing. And you better get something that's just going to earn you a living. And I thought, well, geez, how do you switch? You got all these geology classes. I had about 20 hours of geology, semester hours of geology classes and so forth. And I thought, well, I can still make a change. But, if I do switch, first of all, I'm deferred. Well, they're not going to defer me if I'm just totally switching the program, and I'm not going to graduate for 4 more years or something. So I thought, well, you know what I'll do? I was good at accounting. I took an accounting class or a bookkeeping class in high school. I was very good at it. And I'll major in accounting. It sounds I know I could get a job with an accounting degree.
Right. Okay. So how did you wind up going into the service?
Well, the physics class I was taking is the semester that the Korean War started, and that spring semester. Talked to, as I had mentioned, did talk to me. Well, didn't talk to me, he's talking, and he knew I was interested in meteorology. He said, hey, we got this weather detachment out at Selfridge. You come out one weekend, you get 4 days pay for being there for the weekend, they feed you whatever, and then in the summer you come for a week. And
So this was a reserve. This was a reserve unit.
yeah, Air Force,
Force
Reserve.
okay.
And, I never heard that much about National Guard, but as far as everything we were involved in Selfridge at that time, now it's a National Guard base,
Right.
but at that time it was Air Force Reserve.
Right.
So I went out. That first meeting was the day I got sworn in down at the federal building, and went, oh, I don't think I didn't even have to take a physical. I mean, that's how it was running. So I went out there, and I took had the one meeting. We'd come out one weekend a month in June, and then the war broke out June 25th. So then I'm sitting around. That last 5 or 4 days in June, and maybe the first 4 or 5 days in July, with a classmate of mine, not a close friend, but we knew each other pretty well. We were talking, we were sitting around. It turned out he was in the Army Reserves. And he was one of those guys that they were still drafting in 1947 and 48. Not a lot, maybe 30, 40,000 a year or 20,000, but he for 2 years. But he got in, they got their basic training done. And they said, we're gonna let you out in 60 days. But then you have to be in the active reserves for the balance. It's in the active reserve training. Well, it sounded to them like a good deal. So he was up taking classes, and he was and now he was concerned. And this is quite a story. So I saw him that probably within a couple of days. I found out later. I'll show you, tell you in a minute. Then that was the last I saw him. We were sitting. I said, I wonder who's going to get called up first. And I come back in September, late September, and I go to this coffee shop, big one, that was Wayne's Coffee, right across the street from Old Main, if you're familiar with the Wayne University. And he said, he's on crutches. I said, hey, what the hell happened to you? He said, boy, do I have a story. He said, the week after I talked to you, we got called up. Those guys that all have been put in this Army Reserve. And he said, we did bullshit for 2 years, nothing. He said, they shipped us to Camp McCoy in Wisconsin and then to Washington State. I was in Korea in August. I was in Korea 2 weeks, and I got machine gunned across the back. It broke the bone in one leg, and but the others healed up. But they shipped me back, and he said they're letting me get. I think it was at the Veterans Hospital there in the Ailment Park. They were, working on them, and I said, "Man, are you going to have a great paper to write what I did on my summer vacation?" So, but there are so many stories of that type of guys that their whole life been going through this tumultuous change just in short periods of time.
Right. Now, okay, so what winds up happening to you? You've joined this Air Force Reserve unit based at Selfridge Air Force Base in Michigan, and then, but you're not activated yet. You're still...
No, they never did activate.
Okay, they did not activate.
If anything, they probably eliminated the outfit.
Okay. So what happens to you? So you're still in school then, and this is now the
This
fall
was-
of 1950. Then how long do you stay in school? What else goes on?
Yeah, I was able to stay in that reserve unit. It was still active for that
Okay.
up until the fall of 1951.
Okay. Now, while you were in the reserve unit, what kind of training, if any, did you get?
We just went there and worked with the guys at the enlisted band, releasing the balloons and checking dew point and temperature, etc. But it was in educational for me because it turned out of the 3 officers, it turned out one of the officers lived 4 doors away from me, where my parents' house was. And so I could just drive with him on the weekend that we were out there. And it was only a 15-mile ride, which was rather convenient. So we would collect all the data. And the officers, of course, in those days, we did have a small radar set, but that wasn't really too much. My introduction to what the fax machine is, thermal fax. It was, and it was actually designed by the New York Times, or built for them, because our machine sent property over to New York Times, because they used it to send pictures. You know, how the fact it was about thermal, because it was on a roller like an old piano player, and the needle went across and made this picture, and they'd record all the temperature from the base that was coming into us in the immediate area, and we'd have that plotted down. We didn't do that. In those days, to be a meteorologist, you had to have a master's degree in mathematics, because you had to work with all these formulas. And then they would create a map, and then all of them would put this had to be done on because it's bases. And the base meteorologist, he loved it that these guys came off, and I gave him a weekend off every month. But so it really wasn't any training. The thing that was amazing, I had no absolute basic training. Here's a picture of me. This was the summer of 1950, when I was 18 years old. That was our backyard. We had this one uniform, but that was a summer uniform, but that's the only uniform I had, so I had to wear that every time we came over winter or summer. I wore the same uniform.
All right. And so, now are you following what's happening in Korea at this point?
Oh, yeah, I was very interested in what was going on, watched it carefully. Very interested in the Air Force at that time. The planes, some of the planes were still C-46s, but the C-119 flying boxcars, they took those immediately, and they needed those right that summer over in Korea.
So the aircraft that had been based at Selfridge before the war, those the transport planes, they all get sent out, and the personnel get sent out.
No, the Air Force now, Selfridge had been set up now as a troop carrier wing base with the F-86s.
Right.
That was the first line. You had aircraft guns set up on Belle Isle, etc. So that was, just for that year and a half. Now, what happened after, then, as I mentioned before, that I came back to Selfridge based on what they were able to, or what I was able to get myself involved in. As I said, there was a number of deferments that I'd gone through already. I was deferred. First of all, they let you finish your semester class.
Right.
And then if you took this other test and passed that you were deferred until you graduated, but then you had to go, then you would go in automatically with your graduation. I guess it gave you a train ticket.
Yeah.
And you'd serve 2 years, because I knew a couple of fellows that majored in chemistry and so on, graduated, and then they ended up going in the Army. But unfortunately, for so many of them, they didn't get the advantage that maybe some of the earlier draftees had. But, it was a great deal. I got the GI Bill.
Okay. Well, to sort of follow your story, so basically you're spending, I guess, initially you're just in the reserve unit, and it gets into late in 51, and then what changes late in 51?
I figured if that reserve unit was going to close down, I didn't want to, if I was going to end up having to go in 2 years, I might as well go through and get a program that was going to get me a job, and then I'll do the reverse. I'll go my military time now,
Right.
and go back to school when I get back, and then I'll be on the GI Bill.
Okay, because you changed your programs and so forth, so you put yourself a little bit behind. Okay, so you basically decided to go active duty at this point?
No, I was in the Air Force ROTC.
Okay.
I would have had 2 years to finish up yet with the Air Force without having had the first 2 years.
All right.
I don't know, they must have thought I had some basic training or something, but anyway, all I knew about it is I went down, registered for a class, and they did pay you a little bit of money. For that fall and spring, and in the fall, in the winter, they flew us down to Enid Air Force Base for 3 or 4 days for multi-engine, trying to talk you into going to cadets rather than just the program at Wayne for the ROTC was as an armament officer. You know, we were taking apart 20 millimeter and 50 caliber machine guns and stuff like that. And I was kind of mechanical, but it was not something I was really that fond of. I was very interested in guns. I was an expert. As a matter of fact, you see on my plate, I was qualified. I had the highest mark on the rifle range, and they were like 10,000 that were during that period. I had the highest score. I've been in shooting partridge with a 22 since I was 10 years old. The first 22 I bought in those days, I got on my bicycle with my paper route when I went down to Palmer Park. I said, I bought a 22 in a box, the 22 shells, but didn't get too much a chance to use it because my dad didn't have enough gas ration ticket coupons to go up. They had a little cottage up on a lake way up in Michigan, so didn't get too much involved there.
Okay, so basically, so you stay in school, but now you're in the ROTC.
Yeah.
All right, and you basically skipped the first part of ROTC, and they just let you join in the middle of the program.
Yeah, because I was in the Air Force Reserve, and so they got me discharged from the Air Force Reserve.
Okay. All right. So now you're in ROTC. Now, do you complete that program?
No, just the two. I would have had another year to go after this coming the year I was just going into. So it would have been I would have been in it for 2 years.
Okay.
So I stayed in it, and then at the end of the semester, of course, the war hadn't started yet. You turn your uniform and everything in, and then they kind of close the office up on the campus, because I know they probably went home on their furloughs or whatever. And it turned out with this friend of mine, this acquaintance of mine, had me driving him out to Selfridge.
Okay. Now you explained that to me off camera. Can you kind of tell the story? You're on camera, so the audience will actually hear it.
Yeah.
Okay. So
I lived in Detroit, but of course I was usually down at Wayne University. I had various jobs down there. I worked in a law library on one occasion, and various other side jobs there. So I was in the ROTC as of May. And when I turned my uniform, I thought, what am I going to do next semester? I said, I don't want to stay in this geology program. That's going nowhere for me. It's not what I like. My marks were great, but I could see nobody's going to hire a geology major out of Wayne. And I thought, what am I going to do with it the next semester when I go down to register for a class again and tell the guy, I'm not going to be graduating at the end of this next year. How does this work? Well, I never had a chance to talk this over with anybody. So then this situation developed where this acquaintance of mine needed to ride out to Selfridge.
Okay. So when is this that this happens?
This all happened in I'd say July
Of what year?
1950.
Okay.
It was in I'm sorry, I'm going back.
Yeah.
This is going back to July of 1952.
Right. Okay. So July 52, you know somebody who needs to get to Selfridge. You don't need to go there, but
Well, I told him as a favor to him.
Right.
He said, "I'll buy the gas. You get the car." I was supposed to get a ride, but I'm stuck at I made this appointment. It's all set up for me, but I got to go down.
right.
The
Okay.
federal, would you drive me to the federal building, pick up the papers, and then we'll drive out to Selfridge. And he said, then you could just drop me back off, and I can get around Detroit on a bus then.
Right. Okay. Okay. So you take him up to Selfridge,
Yeah.
and what happens when you get there?
Well, they gave me this physical.
Why are they giving you a physical?
Well, because
You just dropped him off.
the recruiter downtown had said, "Why, as long as you're going out there with him, why don't you go out and get a physical too? It's this great flight physical. I mean, it costs hundreds of dollars."
Okay.
And I thought for sure, I'm gonna find out, no way they're gonna pass me and wear glasses. They'll say, "I'm sorry, son, but you don't have 20/20 uncorrected vision. So I get down there and I get the whole physical. I didn't even know I passed the physical when I left.
Okay. Now, was this a physical for pilot training?
Yeah, yes, this was strictly to go into the Aviation Cadet program, which was, and I understood that too, only because I'm talking to this acquaintance, that if for some reason you didn't make, physical, or you just weren't suited to this training, that you only had to serve out the 2 years so you wouldn't be drafted. Which, that sounds like, a can't lose situation.
Right.
Man, I'm just because I gave up all my deferments I had now to get into this, I now have another one. Except I'll be on active duty now for 2 years, and then I can go back after the 2 years, and I can take the kind of program I think I really should have.
Okay. So you've gone there, you take the physical, and then what happens?
They dilated my eyes and went through the whole bit. I don't know, it was a couple, 2-3 hours. So we get dressed and go home. And they said, well, we'll let you know. Well, they did let me know. Now, I never saw my acquaintance, so I don't know if he passed or failed, but I think I might have bumped into him and he said he didn't pass.
Okay.
But anyway, I get a letter 2 weeks later that said, you've passed, and in the envelope, I guess I must have signed something and I realized it, but I hadn't been sworn into anything. Because I still wasn't in the Air Force. We would like to give you 3 more days of testing down at Chinook Field in Illinois,
Okay.
which is where we do all the, at least in the east of the Mississippi anyway, where you do go through the link training and all these physical things, plus all kinds of tests, paper tests, etc. It's 3 days of testing.
Okay.
It was enjoyable, it was entertaining, And I don't know what's going on here, but I'll just go with the flow.
Right.
So anyway, I come home, and a week or 2 later, they say, you passed. And so I said, well, what do I do now? And they said, well, you can sign up now if you want to if you're worried about getting drafted or something, because you have no deferments left. We got you knocked off all these deferments. So I said, well, this sounds pretty good. I just never did, I always loved everything about flight, the Air Force. That's why I got in the Air Force Reserves when I did. So, go down. It was an interesting train trip. I was put in charge of this one car. We spent our first night. You got sworn in the federal building. They took you over the old Fort Wayne in Detroit, which had been there since the War of 1812, I guess. We stayed there that day and overnight. The next morning, we were taken to the Grand Central Station. They had one car that was all our car. So there were about 30, I guess, or 40. It was a sleeper car. It was 25, I can't remember. It was just a car. And the reason I don't remember too much, because I was the only one that had a little bit of Air Force Reserve background.
Right.
And I'd been to college a little bit. That they put me in charge. I had all the paperwork and all the guys, and I was big time guy here all of a sudden. So anyway, there was one young black fellow that was there, and I guess he was really nervous. He was the only one that was black. And I was given this special end thing. I had my own little room. Oh, it was about the size of this room. With the bunk beds, and we had our own, and it had its own sink. And he said, I'm scared. I'm really scared about being on telephone. Would you mind? He was just an 18-year-old kid. He was married to us. He looked like he was about 16.
What was he afraid of? Just going south?
Just being, he'd never been around white people before.
Oh.
So I think it was more his concern. It was the white guys being concerned about him, obviously. They were 20, and he was just this one guy. And I said, sure, he just felt sorry. I had talked to him previously, and I guess he figured I wasn't. Okay. I said, sure, that's fine with me. If you feel safer in here, sure, great. And there was no trouble. We absolutely going down there. The guys were all good. I said, look, I don't care what you have or what you do, but don't give me any trouble. I don't want to start off my career in trouble because I let you guys get it. If there's any cans or anything you got, you drop them down the toilet so they drop on the railroad tracks. I don't want any mess in the car. If we stop someplace, you better get your ass back here way early before the train takes off again. So we got all the way down to, it was about a two days of train travel. You know, we were talking, I don't know, 1,500-mile trip or something down there on and it wasn't a super fast airline.
Right. Now, would it stop places where you could get off? You could
Yeah,
get off.
you know,
Okay.
you could go into the station, whatever, buy snacks. But they served us our food and everything, right?
Okay.
We didn't leave the car. They served us like box lunches or whatever.
Okay. Because you are heading into the segregated South, and so the black serviceman might have an interesting time if he's in the wrong place or does the wrong thing. But nothing came up.
Nothing came up. I don't know if he even got, I never got off. I never bothered going in to get anything, but I don't know, maybe he was apprehensive. But we were going through states like Illinois, maybe Illinois,
Well, yeah, but
Missouri. I don't know, maybe the closest would have been maybe Alabama.
you might go through Arkansas, Oklahoma, Louisiana, and then Texas.
And by that time, I think we were probably was night travel. I don't know. At least I never thought of the problem.
Okay.
I wasn't aware that there was that much segregation. I just wasn't aware, and I don't think most of the guys. A lot of them were up from that were in it. Were from the Flint area for
Right,
some
sure,
reason.
sure. You're all coming from Michigan. All right. Okay. So now you get down to San Antonio. Now what happens?
Well, you go through some of them more stuff. They issue new uniforms. They give you another physical. I don't know. I guess they give you a physical or something down there, and kind of include you in as to what was going on and what the requirements were and what you couldn't do and what you could do. And basically, I had a good experience in basic training. I kind of enjoyed it. It was a long day. I didn't mind it though.
Okay. So here you are getting Air Force basic training.
Right.
Okay.
It was 12 weeks.
All right. And what does that actually consist of?
Oh, you went on night marches and they'd blow off dynamite off on the side or something at night, and they'd put you through a building with tear gas when you put a mask on. You had a lot of classes. You had to take math and various things that might prepare you for various tech schools.
Mm-hmm.
And then you use that as also information as to what kind of assignment they might give you.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, I had some college math.
Yeah.
So obviously, I did better than probably most of this. Most of them were just high school. There might have been one or two, but I'm not aware of it. That went beyond high school, of course, and at that point in time, 1950, probably about 10% of high school graduating classes went to college.
Right. Okay. So you do well in the test. Was this where you did the rifle range stuff too?
Oh yeah. They were having problems in Korea. They had some of the people there that didn't know how to shoot a gun practically. So they want to make sure all the Air Force people would have some training. So, but their basic weapon was just a carbine. I was familiar with a Garand, and rifles. As I said, I've been around rifles all my life. So, and that was entertaining. That was enjoyable. I was surprised. A lot depended on the rifle you got to, how accurate it was. I think it just like that. I had a lot of training shooting. As a matter of fact, when I was in high school, we had a rifle range in the basement at Denby High School. You could come down there one night a week and shoot at targets. They had, I guess, high school ROTC. They would practice in the basement with 22s.
Okay. Now, and then was there also a lot of discipline?
I was disciplined, used to discipline all my life, so I didn't think it was much work. Well, I think the officers I thought were, not the officers,
The sergeants or the NCOs who were training you, yeah.
Were kind of, good, but they would carry it too far. It was really funny because one of my classmates from Wayne, it turns out it was another group.
Mm-hmm.
The guys, the training, I just couldn't get over that. I knew he was a Canadian, but he had joined the American Air Force. Mm-hmm. And he was now a TI.
Okay.
And he had the same job these guys that were over us had, so he knew me really well. I mean, I knew him better than a lot of people down that way, so I had, but there were classes, a lot of basic, the rules, marching. I did a lot of marching. I always enjoyed even marching, actual group marching, like parade marching. Yeah, I thought that was good physical exercise.
All right. Now, the people you were training with, were they potentially going to do any number of different things in the Air Force?
They didn't find out what they were assigned to. In those cases, in those days, you didn't get to pick what you were going to go into. And you went into what they said they thought you were qualified for, so.
Okay.
There was a rumor, they would start rumors deliberately. Like, okay, this whole group is going to be going to cook school, or this whole is going to go in. Gosh, it was the don't believe rumors. They'd feed these all this in just to keep you there. Don't pay too much attention to what people say because it's all fake news.
All right. So what happens to you now once you finish your training?
Well, we get that last day where we're actually there is when they start telling people what they're running. The guy says, "Yeah." He said, "We don't know what to do with you." He said, "But they brought over this book. And there was the big loose leaf binder, and it had open positions at every air base in the United States. As a matter of fact, there might have even been some in Europe, I guess. I never got that far.
Okay.
So I looked through and
So are they telling you?
I looked at Selfridge. I looked at a couple other places. I don't know.
So why are
North Dakota? I've got relatives in North Dakota, but I don't want to go to North Dakota.
Okay. So why are they letting you pick?
Because they had to put me someplace for a year and a half left.
Okay. All right. But why wouldn't they just assign you somewhere?
Well, that's why I said they were always very good to me.
Okay.
I thought the Air Force.
But was it because you had tested well? Was that part of it?
No.
Okay.
Just whatever it was, I had to find something in this book that I think it was just like a 70010 about the lowest level.
All right.
So they sent me up there.
Okay.
They could have just used me as a floor washer or permanent KP or something.
Yeah.
So I accepted that a slot at the 2242nd. Now that's a regular Air Force. After stands for Air Force Reserve Training Center, which was part of the 10th Air Force, which was also headquartered at Selfridge at that time.
Okay.
So I get up there, and I hand them, "You carry this service record with you." And I give it to the guy, and the guy said, they had just requested, they had a slot for a real low-level flunky. They said, "We can't do this." Say, "Wait a minute. We've got a position open in the office, base operation right now for the 2242nd. For clerk typist. Can you type?" "Oh, sure, I can type." I took typing, and I can do 50, 60 words. I mean, I was pretty good at it.
Yeah.
And he said, "Oh, great, that's the same as hiring a stenographer." So I took that position, which was interesting. I mean, I type up minutes for homosexual discharge board and all these. And as I said, I got the type up, and I think it was at 51. It might have been 52, but I think 51. These orders, they said, "Hey, normally we didn't get this. Take these orders up for 10th Air Force to distribute to our units because we don't have enough copies." So I typed up these orders, and as I said, Lindbergh was on the order, and I know he was promoted because he was an Air Force reservist, was promoted to Brigadier General. And Jimmy Stewart, either he was already maybe temporary rank of Brigadier General, he had been a colonel for a while. Was also on the orders, and I can't remember because when I moved in 1990, and getting all the papers and stuff, where it happened, I had a folder full of stuff, and it just plain disappeared. So I lost those orders, which I would have. It was kind of a real kind of thing. But they don't survive. You can see these orders. I've got my orders here too, but the papers, here's my orders, here's the ones that I got discharged on. That's what you're typing on, that sort of thing.
Right. Okay. So how long did you spend doing that?
Over a year and a half.
Okay. And so what kind of stands out in your memory about the time you spent there?
Let's see. Probably the thing that stands out, I know this fella pretty well. Only because he's frequently getting into a little bit of trouble.
Mm-hmm.
He was an older guy in his 30s, I would imagine. But when I got hospitalized, when I moved from Texas up to Selfridge,
Mm-hmm.
I went from 70-degree temperature to a miserable cold day.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd been there maybe a week or two that we had these barracks were built. They were coal-fired little furnaces, coal in there. One big room with a little half-wall partition, but I got seriously sick. I woke up one night in the middle of the night, about 2, 3 o'clock, and I go into, over to the water dispensary, or whatever you call it, where you'd go. I'm getting in there, it's 2 in the morning, and I go in, there's like a dead guy laying on the floor. I'm sick. I've got a burning fever, I'm sick. And here they got a dead guy on the floor, and there's nobody else around. So finally 2 guys, I don't know if they were FBI or Secret Service or what it was. And they asked me, who the hell are you? And I said, what are you here for? I said, I'm sick. But anyway, it was fine. That was
Okay.
taken care of. I found out later what they were investigating was that he had hung himself in the stockade.
Mm-hmm.
And it turned out that several people, they were really sick people that were watching the people.
Mm-hmm.
And they were torturing us.
Oh.
And there was a big investigation, I remember. So, but if we ever hear anybody, we'll know where they got the information. You are not to open your mouth. So anyway, but that all worked all right. And then it really worked out rather fortunate for me. This was now I'd just been at Selfridge,
Mm-hmm.
and I'd only been in service like 6 months. And I was in the hospital. This nurse who took care of me was one of the people taking care of me, and she knew she had seen me at church or Catholic.
Mm-hmm.
And talking background, I think it was there in the hospital maybe 5 or 6 days, really serious throat injury, and I had scarlet fever, which when I was 4, and 25%, 20% of the kids died if they got scarlet fever in those days. But it was a serious throat infection.
Right.
So I'm in the hospital there, and we're talking, and she said, well, why don't you, if you want, I was still living on base, and you drive with, I'm taking classes at Wayne University. If you're a full-time military service, there's no tuition, it's free, absolutely free. Man, this is, thank you, Jesus, you're really looking after me. So, yeah, she would try, and then when I got out of the hospital, and by the way, another first Negro I really actually got to know really was a doctor that took, he was a black doctor, captain from Detroit. I guess he was Detroit, well, I assume he might have been from Detroit, I don't know. Great guy, if he'd have been he'd be my family doctor, he was a great guy. I don't know if I've had a doctor healthy better than him. So it really was good for me to have this introduction, because in Minnesota, where my parents and all my relatives lived, I had cousins that occasionally would come down to me, and they'd gone to Africa. They'd never seen black people before in their life. They never saw anybody. So my parents didn't bring any prejudice with them either. So, but anyway, then I was able to I take this English course that I was having to get, and I was really didn't anticipate enjoying it, but it turned out it was really quite good. So, and it worked out fine. But then, halfway through that semester, this would have been 1951.
Well, wait, was this after, but this is while you're at Selfridge now?
I'm still at Selfridge.
So that's not,
going to
so it's more like 53 by then probably, right?
What was that?
You just said 51, and it wasn't until 52 that you got up to Selfridge.
What am I keep getting the years? Yeah, this would have been 1953.
Right, okay.
This would have been, I'm sorry, I skipped the year.
Why I'm here.
This would have been 1953, the middle of the semester. It was home for the weekend. And I know there was a power failure or something, because I had to go on detail to stoke the stove in the barracks. And the alarm didn't go off, so I didn't show up. And this one sergeant, he was just not very bright. He loved having a little bit of power. Going to put me in for a court martial. That gets me up the office. He said, "No, wait a minute." A major that ran Kellerman that ran the operation said to him, "Let me see. He's on separate rations." Oh, I skipped a part. I got so sick when I was sick in the hospital. Major Kellerman said, "Hey, you folks live so close. These facilities are so bad. You want to live at home? Let's go in separate rations."
Okay.
You usually have to be married or something or be an NCO. It's all right. And you'll just be on a one meal a day plan here. And so I was on separate rations living at home. That's why I was staying home overnight, and the alarm didn't go off. So I wasn't there for that 2 o'clock stoking the furnace. And the Major Kellerman talks to the guy and said, "Now look, he's on separate rations, right? He can't eat in the chow except one meal, but you're going to put him on KP all day, but he can only eat one meal. Okay, he's got to be in the barracks to stoke the furnace, but he doesn't have a room in the barracks." So, use your head. So Major Kellerman's solution was he took me off all detail and all KP. So that's all that little problem. Another one's somebody's looking after me up there. So I lived the rest of the time, the last year, over a year, I was on separate rations. I lived at home. I didn't have a bunk. I was regular Air Force. I was promoted by the 10th Airman second class. And the problem was too, I couldn't go to any of these schools that I qualified for, because it's like a double whammy. To qualify for a school, not only do you have to have all the paper requirements, you had to have 2 years of service remaining to go to that school after you graduate.
Right.
So I couldn't go into an assignment like in meteorology. I couldn't be a weatherman because you had to go to that weather school, even though I'd worked for a year and a half in that. In that area, and I'd taken the college course in meteorology because I didn't go to that school. Well, there's probably some halfway decent reasons for that. But in any case, it worked out all right just being working in the office there.
Now, what was actually going on at the base? I mean, what was
At
being used
that
for?
point in time, it was also a defense. We had F-86s on the base.
Okay, and those were jet fighters, right?
They were there. They were regular Air Force. They were there to protect Detroit.
Yeah.
The other thing we did on the base was in 1951, late 51, start of 52, they redesignated the 439th Troop Carrier Wing to the 439th Fighter Bomber Wing. And for that spring and summer, we had Mustangs and Texans, T-6s, and they were recalling fighter pilots from World War II. These guys were, again, unhappy guys. They had been in the active reserve, but they didn't like the idea of getting called up. And again, as I said, this is not a flying club here. So anyway, that only went on for about 6 months or so, continued on. And because Mustangs still were used in Korea at that point, up until that point. And then they switched over to F-80 Lockheed Lightning planes, and I got to fly in them in a T-33. I said, they were always so good. Hey, Ken, you want to go up? I'll see if I can make you sick.
Okay.
So I did get to fly in a jet, although I was a front seater. You know, when you're training plane, the guy that's controlling it sits behind you, and he can close you out, but you can't close him out
Right.
from flying the plane. But I didn't fly it. Don't get me wrong.
Right.
So, anyway, let's see, where were we?
Well, we're just going to talk about different things that happened while in that time when you're spending now on active duty at Selfridge.
Yeah. Oh, this guy, this sergeant, I was telling you that this is a different sergeant now. This guy, he had been in the battalion death march. He was captured at Corregidor, survived the death march, and then was transported sometime in that 1942 period to Japan on a cargo ship going back from the Philippines, Japanese control, and survived all the American ships trying to torpedo everything that came in sight.
Yeah, that may well have been in 44, but okay.
He gets into Japan, and he were at this camp, and he said, on the base, on the camp itself, it was bad, and the worst was a guy that was, I'm not going to mention names, he was a Marine, I think, a master sergeant, I think. It was just terrible, and he was making all special considerations because of being the head problem maker. At least that's what he told me. He said, but we were shipped off, we were taken off the prison, out of the prison every day in the morning early to a factory. We worked in the factory. At the end of the day, but he said in the factory we were treated every bit as well as the people who worked there. We got the same food rations, everything. So that's why he came out reasonably healthy. But he spent the rest of it, as far as I know, the whole period of the war, he was in that prison camp from 42 to 45. But of course, I don't know how long it took him from that in 42 to get back, but I think they shipped him out pretty fast. If they had, cargo ships coming from Japan with cargo and troops and stuff, they'd go back empty, they'd take these prisoners, and if they got torpedoed, then the Americans just went down with the ship. But he had some real fascinating stories to have, to be on a first-hand talking basis with him. And I think he had a little bit of a drinking problem. And when I was sick, he'd go down to the dispensary, saying, "Get me some turbinhydrate." That's better known as GI gin. Which had a high alcohol content, and if I can't. Because you'd be sitting up there for some disciplinary reason, not all the time, but every once in a while he'd be up there. He'd be up stuck there all day. And I said, if you're going up there today to get your painkiller, he said, could you bring me back? They just gave us just like one shot in a bottle, It was good stuff to taste like. GI gin tasted like a martini, martini, I guess. It was pretty high alcohol content, but it really worked. But I'm trying to think, let's see, what am I missing anything here? Okay, and then, so I was there a year and a half. I said, I got a memorial citation. We put up for Airman of the Month. They had got in, and I always felt it was, some guys would just move off every chance they had in service. I said, time fast, better if you're doing something. They got an addressograph machine in, which you can type little metal plates with name and address and things. You could do them for name tags, etc. But I suggested, I said, we've got the woman working on that, so practically all she did was mail out stuff and had to type up all the envelopes to all of this reservists, and we probably had about 80 to 100 reservists. So why don't I just type up plates for them, and then she could just run them on the other. So I went down there, and they were in a nice brick building way in the center of the base. And I took all their files. I'd take one tray at a time from the office and go up there and type them, or whatever I could do. And within 2 days, I had all of them all done back. And well, I was there. The guys from 10th Air Force, they told me they call back. Every time I go down there, he's down there working, typing up these plates, these metal plates. So it was not really that big a job, but the fact, I guess I just did it, and I had no supervision, and got it done. But I was glad the guy that did get it was somebody had saved somebody in a fire that when a plane came in, and they had included a weekend at a hotel downtown Detroit, etc. And I didn't have a girlfriend. I lived in Detroit. I didn't have to. Don't even really consider that. Don't even consider that. I'm not even. They knew every month they would come up with an airman of the month kind of situation, but it was a small. Now, what was that? We're gonna talk about something else here too. That of course I typed up type up dittos. The orders, this kind of thing. I did a lot of that stuff, typing up orders, shipping people around, so. I guess I didn't bring it. I didn't bring I have it. Oh, I know I was going to mention. It's my brother and I. This would have been in 1950. That would have been in 1952. I don't know if that's going to even come up.
Yep.
Yeah. My brother finished his electronics institute, and he was married, but he was immediately drafted. Did you remember a guy by the name of Pete Wallmeyer that wrote for the Detroit News?
No.
Well, anyway, he was big on the Detroit News up until just a few years ago. And he had worked as a cub reporter out of high school. We all went to high school together. But he was one of the major Detroit News people. But anyway, he and my brother, turns out, are standing in the line with the rest. They just got sworn in. And they said, every other guy step out. You're in the Marine Corps. This was just right after they got massacred in North Korea, the Marines.
Right.
Well, it really, I think, really worked out for the individuals and for the Corps. They looked through how can we best, and the Army did the same thing, like one of my brother-in-laws was I forget what you call the technical name, heavy machine mover for Ford. He had gone through an apprenticeship. Right. Got drafted him, they immediately put him in. What, tank recovery.
Right.
Well, my brother was electronics, but they took us and said, geez, you got all this electronics we haven't got. It takes so long to train anybody for this kind of stuff. We finished Parris Island, their basic training. They said, well, I don't know. They had a guy come over and ran the school for the electronics school. He knows 10 times more than I do anything. So they shipped him up to Cherry Point. So he spent it, as a matter of fact, in the Marine Corps, if you fill position, you got that rank, temporary rank. So he was only in service in the Marine Corps maybe a year, and he was a 3-star. Well, you can see here he was only a corporal, but he got drafted in 51. This was like 6 months later, he's already a corporal. And then they made him a sergeant. The only time he got out of the country to go to Puerto Rico on maneuvers one time, I guess, but he just stayed with it. And his first daughter was born there. I don't know if we're anything more, anything.
Okay.
Anything else that I can go into, except on the discharge was kind of an interesting situation. Separation for service. Now, see, it just said separate, it is released from assignment, okay? Now, normally at that time, and my brother was that way, you spent 2 years on active duty and then you were in the reserves, I think, for 4 or 6 years, I forget what it was. Or in reserves,
Right.
anyway. And so, when I'm getting discharged, they said, well, we're separated from service about the reserve. And I said, you know what, I was just reading someplace in the book. If you had prior military service, you weren't required to have that 4 years. Now, there was nothing, it was in limbo from December 1949 until August 1950. That summer, Congress hadn't got around to saying what your status would be. And so what they came up with, well, there was nothing on the books. If you had prior service, then you weren't required to have any reserve requirements. I said, you know, I think I get a discharge right now. I said, I don't want to get out and find out I can be drafted or get called up on active duty or doing something right away. You know, I'm 24 years old, I was 22 years, 23 years old. I want to get on with my life. So they sent back to the Pentagon. So one of my papers are when it's Air Force rank such and such and such and such. And I go back and give them a discharge. So again, it was another double whammy, but it kind of worked out in my favor. It wouldn't have been a problem, I guess. I could have just been an active reserve. My brother didn't get discharged, I think, until 1961, finally.
All right, now this tape is about up, so I'm going to stop here. All right, now we've kind of gotten your story pretty much to the point of your discharge, but you mentioned to me off camera here just now, you did at some point, you spent time in the hospital early.
That was a throat.
With your throat, and then you also got injured at some point?
Well, it cracked. I didn't know it at the time. I had terrible pain. So I went into the unit there, and you couldn't see anything wrong. Well, about a week later, it was really bad. It abscessed all the way across my mouth, and I lost all these teeth here.
Okay.
But they did, which I don't think they normally did, they made a permanent bridge. If that was done today, it would cost about $12,000. So I should have had it replaced, and now it's one of these new format that they have.
Now, do you know how it happened? Was just...
I don't know. I don't know.
So you didn't have an accident or something?
No, I forget really. All I remembered is afterwards, you know. And I say, was it the result of doing this, or was it this, or what is it? And all I can say was, but it wasn't, any tooth decay. It was just that it had the tooth that was cracked across, and then so eventually all of these had to be pulled out, and they made that bridge, which they replaced.
Right.
I mean, and I had to have it redone.
Right. Okay. Now, when you were finishing up your enlistment, did the Air Force make any effort to encourage you to re-enlist?
Oh, sure. Yeah, but they knew I wasn't going to be particularly interested, as they tried to tell my brother to do. I mean, had I, and I really on this I absolutely believe, had I gone in, I was very fond of, if you want to call it that, of the Air Force. I loved flying. That had I not, you can't, your eyes aren't correctable to 2020. Would have gone in. Well, the units I think that I was going with, they were being schooled for the new jet bomber. They were the twin blades. I think it was a B-47. So the Stewart was in that movie they made. That plane with the bomber that was coming. That was the first bomber that flew over 400 miles an hour, 500 miles an hour. And I would have stayed in service. I probably would have made a career out of service. And those are the same guys that all got shot down over in Vietnam were the bombers. That's where most of the Air Force pilots, aircraft were the bombers that got hit were getting shot down by large numbers. But
okay. So once you did get out, what did you do?
I went right back to Wayne University to school, and I graduated a year and a half later with a degree in it. I got a master's degree in business, and I got to be a CPA. And, but I never practiced. I'd worked with the Department of the Navy too because of my background in machine tool business on government contracts. That's the only other experience I had in this area. I had contractors at Grand Rapids and Holland, Michigan, and building destroyers in Bay City where we'd give them, it cost at that time it was about $2.5 million for the basic structure of this destroyer, and they made the best destroyer for the at the Defoe shipyard in Bay City. But they eventually closed it down because they couldn't keep all the shipyards open. So I did have auditing experience with these outfits. So and I had been working on a doctorate in economics for a year, and then I said, oh, I'm too old for this kind of thing. I want to be up there in limbo and satellite around the world. So I'm finding that I'm 38 or 39 by that time. I did a good part. You could substitute one of the languages. You could take math up to calculus and differential equations and difference equations and so on. And I did that part. But that's just getting the classwork and is getting a dissertation approved. I don't want this. My kids are graduating from high school. They're going to be in college. I'd be up there but still. But my kids did very, very well. My son got into med school out of high school with 6-year programs, and their daughter went to law school at Ann Arbor. And she's teaches at Fordham. She's been on the Bush board. She's been a permanent editor for many, many years. All my kids are pushing 60 now, so they're older than you are.
Not by too much. All right. So, aside from the education part, what do you think you took out of your military experience?
Well, I took a lot. I certainly took a lot more out than I even put in. I got a lot of benefit from service in terms of having a time to sit down and think, what am I really going to do? And reorganize my life. I met a lot of very wonderful people that I never would have had the opportunity to have met had it not been for that military experience. As I said, I got the GI Bill, and one of the reasons I think I got the master's degree was that I still had, after I got out, because I'd already had almost 2 years in, I still had 2 years of GI Bill left. So I thought, hey, that master degree, you only have to take 12 semester hours to get full benefits. So I said, that made I bought a new house, a $15,000 house, and I made my monthly house payment. So I got into a new house, probably before I would have, but so I got a lot more out of it, and then I realized if I hadn't got the master's degree, because when I went to, I had been working for the Navy for 3 years from 62 maybe to 1965. But a lot of travel. I had the whole state of Michigan, various contract, General Motors, Flint, Holland, Saginaw, all over. And I was out at the Air University and Wright-Patterson Air Force Base for a couple of weeks at one point in time. That this just isn't conducive to having teenage kids. And I was going to apply just temporarily while I looked for a job. I quit the job with the Navy. I thought, man, this is like going to heaven. I really don't like the kids. Accounting kids never talk back to you, or usually don't. They're there because they want to be there. So, and then the advantage was too that you're off during the summers if you want it off. And none of these benefits I would have had if it hadn't been some guy's hand taking me through the military. It could have been a totally different life.
Mm-hmm.
That now you buy a Volkswagen camper bus, buy it in this country, but for deliver in Amsterdam, you don't pay any taxes. No excise taxes, nothing. So in '69, I bought one for delivery in Amsterdam, drove it, and it came great for the kids. Did Africa, all over Europe. And I thought, boy, that's pretty good. 1971.
Mm-hmm.
Did the same thing, but this time I had planned on we were going to drive into St. Petersburg, Leningrad, I guess. But I got the visa from Russia,
Mm-hmm.
paid the Germans, and found out I'm going to go get over there. Man, don't you have to drive through East Germany? Do not drive through East Germany. Hell, I got all this
Mm-hmm.
visa from Russia to go into there as a tour on a travel visa.
Mm-hmm.
So instead went through Czechoslovakia and Poland into the Ukraine. And just for the kick of it, drove down out of the Ukraine through Romania, Hungary, Ukraine, Poland, down to Istanbul, Turkey, and then over down through Greece. It was a marvelous experience for kids.
Okay. So the only East Bloc country to give you trouble was East Germany. The other ones were perfectly happy to have you. Yeah.
No, they said, you can so much as have a license plate bracket not right, and they'll throw you in jail. It's just terrible. In the Ukraine, they were wonderful. They were really nice. I don't know if you got time for this sort of thing. So coming out of the Ukraine into coming back into Hungary, the Lvov in Ukraine. My wife was Polish background, you could understand me, not speak, but could you understand Russian? Met some young Russian kids, I don't know if they were spies, spying on me, thinking maybe I was a spy, but they spoke perfect English, we never talked about anything. And just everything was just great. We got to the border and we were going to go out of Ukraine. Had to declare if you had any money or whatever. And I said, any Russian money? And I said, my son has a Band-Aid can full of coins that he's picked up in Russia, the currency. Just about 10 minutes, this fancy uniform gets in his, was this Russian money? I said, it's my son and his box. He said, oh. And are you familiar with the Volkswagen camper buses? Okay, so there's that fold-down table. He says, gets in and sits down, and my son was sitting over here, and he says, where's this money? And Chris Paul says, you don't have this one. You don't have this one. The one thing they did do, they blanked all my film.
Oh.
Totally. But other than that, it was just, it's a fool's luck I get. And I think of it now, how the hell did I get the nerve to do that? But fortunately, it worked, it was great. The experiences were great, and I did it again in 1976. This time, though, we went up through Norway and down and around. One time then as soon as I got back, the first time I got back, it turned out where the good deal on this was. The Volkswagen boss, bringing Volkswagen cars. He lives right from Emden, Germany, which, by the way, happens to be closer where some of my relatives originally came from. And their destination is Toledo, Ohio. $170, I think it was, all 3 times,
Wow.
2 times. Brought it back within a week. Was able to sell it. You sell it for as much as I paid for it, because I don't pay no. If you had to have it out of the country for 6 weeks or 7 weeks, I forget. So I was always there on these charter flights. The first time I went with 5 people. 5 of them, all. It was under $1,000, and that included a night stay in a hotel, Holiday Inn in Amsterdam. But so All it cost me was the price of the gas, and we lived out of the camper, so you could go over there with very little money. It cost more for one to go there on one little tour for a week than one
Right.
could go there for 4 or 5 weeks.
Mhm.
I think it kept the kids off the street while they were in those dangerous teenage years.
Mm.
So they always appreciated it. We had a great experience. We were in Norway, and we met the naval attaché, the American naval attaché for Norway, over the ambassador there. And so we got there. It happened to be the day before it was the 4th of July, and the naval attaché, he said, well, stay with us. And he had some teenage kids. They were great to see some American kids. And he said, hey, there's a 4th of July picnic tomorrow. You want to go? We went. Turned out the ambassador threw it. It was the ambassador of all these people. And here, this great big American-style picnic in the middle of Oslo, Norway. But it was time after time, some great experiences like that, going through Fez and Morocco and Marrakesh in that area, which was the drug capital of the world roughly at the time. But not for us. We picked up a Moroccan boy who gave us the tour of Fez. He was just the nicest kid. A young man, I should say, young man. Really showed us things that normally you didn't, get to see. But nothing that was ever any problem. I never put a scratch on a car. I think I've driven him more than 20-some thousand miles in Europe, and we just so lucky. No accidents, no anything. But again, you got to have a good guardian angel for that.
Something. All right. Well, the whole thing makes for an interesting and unusual story. So,
Well, I thought I didn't have any war stories for you. Except there was so much unusual stuff in it that
Yes, there was.
was a little bit different. I thought, especially that I've never heard anything that American prisoners of war in Japan were not just in the camp, that they were working.
Oh yeah,
in
actually,
factories.
that is in the history books. But all right. Well, but anyway, thank you very much for taking the time to share the story today.